Okay, today we'll get started. It's a convening of Massachusetts Gaming Commission. We are holding this public meeting virtually, so I will do a roll call. Good morning again, Commissioner O'Brien.
And I am here again.
Morning again, Commissioner Hill.
Good morning, I'm here.
Great. Good morning again, Commissioner Skinner.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning again, Commissioner Maynard.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I am here.
All right, we're going to get started then, and today is November 16th. It is our public meeting number 402. It's my understanding today, Director Wells, we do not have an administrative update.
Correct.
Okay, then we're going to move right into our community affairs programming for today. We have quite a bit on for you. Chief Delaney, good morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Several things up today, but the first item before you is a bond release for MGM Springfield. So MGM Springfield is requesting the release of the performance bond that's being held for the commitment made by MGM Springfield to construct 54 market rate housing units as part of their gaming license. Since we have several new commissioners on board since we've last dealt with this, I put together a kind of a chronology of this whole thing. And if you've read through that, you'll see that an awful lot of stuff has transpired since the start of this project. I won't go into that full history of this, but I did want to touch on just a few things before the commission renders a decision on this. So throughout the design and permitting of MGM, a bunch of changes took place that were reviewed and approved by the commission. But ultimately, what the requirement here was that MGM would develop 54 market rate housing units within a half a mile of the MGM site. So they started working on finding a location for that, and they had a couple of sites that they were working on. But in the meantime, the city of Springfield had requested that MGM participate in the redevelopment of the 31 Elm Street property, which is of course right next door to the MGM site. And everybody was agreeable to that. So MGM negotiated with the city for, not for MGM to develop the property, but for them to contribute money towards that development. And that value was $16 million. Now, there were various delays with the MGM project, and the project opened without the completion of the housing units and the Wahlburgers building. And because these were incomplete, the commission required the posting of a performance bond at that time in the amount of $25 million. When Wahlburgers was finished, the bond was reduced down to the $16 million, which is that magic number of how much money MGM had to contribute to the 31 Elm Street project. So in early 2020, things started really starting to come together on this project, on the 31 Elm Street project. This project is exceptionally complex. There are multiple parties that are involved with it. There's several different developers, there's Mass Housing, there's a whole, the city of Springfield, MGM, all of these folks are all involved in this. So a number of agreements were written up at that time, which needed to be executed. But one of the things that the commission needed to do was, in order for those agreements to move forward, the commission needed to confirm that that $16 million payment would satisfy the housing requirement. So just before the pandemic hit, we had a meeting out in Springfield, and a number of motions were taken by the commission that essentially said MGM no longer has to provide 54 units of housing, but they do have to provide $16 million to Mass Housing. The commission did also require that that bond be maintained until such time as those payments were made. And again, due to the pandemic and other financial factors, some of those dates pushed out further and further and further. But in the end, on May 20th of this year, MGM made the $16 million payment to Mass Housing, which satisfies the housing requirement as established in those February 27th, 2020 motions. So based on that, MGM has met their commitment by making that payment, and therefore they can be released from this bond. So if you agree with the release of the bond, we request a vote to authorize that release. And I've also included in your packet a draft letter from Executive Director Wells to Gus Kim at MGM, allowing the release. So with that, I will open it up for any questions from the commission.
Commissioners, any questions for Chief Delaney?
Just appreciation, Chief Delaney, for putting that together. It was really helpful.
I don't have a question, Madam Chair, just a comment to Joe and his team and the people at MGM. I know it was a lot of work went into complying with that requirement and figuring out how to get that project off the ground, the public-private partnership. So it's too bad Bruce Stebbins isn't here to see it, because he would have very much appreciated this big step forward on this. So it's good to see.
And happy birthday to Bruce Stebbins. I saw that on social media.
Thank you, Joe. I thought that the history was really important for our new commissioners. It has been quite a journey, with so many partners, right, Joe?
Yes, and I should mention that the project is under construction now. So it's not just that the payment is made, it's actually moving forward. And it looks like we're really going to get these units, and it's a really transformational project for the city of Springfield. And I think it's great for MGM and for us and for everyone.
It's very exciting. And I think when our schedules allow, there could be a permissible tour for us to go on, Joe, as a group. And I know that Commissioner O'Brien and I've had the benefit of seeing it in the early stages, and it will be really exciting to see it at this stage, and then of course when it's completed, but very exciting for Springfield. Okay, so you need a vote for us?
Yes.
Okay, I move that the commission find that Blue Tarp Redevelopment has satisfied its initial RFA2 construction-related obligations and is accordingly released from its obligation to maintain a deposit bond in accordance with Section 10A of Chapter 23K.
Second.
Any questions or edits on this? All right, Commissioner O'Brien.
Aye.
Commissioner Hill.
Aye.
Commissioner Skinner.
Aye.
Commissioner Maynard.
Aye.
Yes, 5-0. Thanks. Great work.
All right. So the next item up for your consideration is the Encore quarterly report. We have Jackie Crum and Juliana Catanzariti with us from Encore to make that presentation. So Jackie, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Joe. And I guess I should say good morning again, too. Thank you for having us here this morning. We will go through this, I think, a bit as quickly as we can, because I know we also have guests here from the city for the second part of the agenda. So Juliana, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, I'm just going to share my screen. Is everyone able to see that? Great.
Perfect.
So good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Thank you for your attention this morning to our third quarter report. As usual, we will begin with a brief overview of our gaming revenue, taxes, and lottery sales. So as you can see, during Q3, our gross gaming revenue for table games was about $81 million. For slots, it was about $103 million, for a total of $184 million, with about $46 million in state taxes collected. Here's a year-over-year comparison, and the Q3 results are highlighted here in yellow. Moving on to our lottery sales, during Q3, our total lottery sales were about $879,000, which was a 13% increase over the same quarter of 2021. And here's the year-over-year comparison there. Moving on to workforce now. So at the end of Q3, we had a total of 3,479 employees. 55% of those employees fell into a minority category, 2% were veterans, 46% were women. Of those, 88% were residents of our host and surrounding communities, and 91% were residents of Massachusetts as a whole.
Juliana, could we pause on that?
Sure.
Commissioner, do you have questions on these statistics? Just because I might be hard to go back. Any questions for Juliana?
Can you just give us a couple, about a minute or so to just take a look at these, please, Madam Chair?
Sure. Just digest them. Commissioner Hill? Thoughts?
I'm looking at the women, and I
Mhm.
see that we continue to be below the goals that have been set. But I also remember in the last update that we got that there was probably going to be an increase in that number because more opportunities were going to be open in some of the businesses that had to have been closed during COVID. Is that an accurate statement? Or can we talk about that a little bit?
Well, actually, we have gone up 1 percentage point from previous quarters. So we're at 46% instead of 45%. We're continuing to make that effort. All of our teams have been, we talk about it at our director level meetings, all of our teams have been instructed as much as possible to reach out to try to, if they're two equal candidates, obviously, to select the woman candidate. So it is something that we're consciously working on and trying to increase.
Jackie, can I ask a question about that in the women and also the minority representation in manager and above?
Sure.
You're very close to the women's stat.
Yep. Juliana, do you want to flip to the next slide? I think that might, yeah.
Yeah, and then the minority, that was about 10% up. I'm just wondering if you guys could speak to what you do and are doing to try to keep those numbers up.
Sure. Again, we hold a weekly meeting where we go through each job that's available for promotion and who the candidates are for that job. It's something that's at the forefront of everything we do. You'll see that it's a relatively small number of employees that we have in each of these categories. So the additional subtraction of 2 or 3 employees actually makes the percentage change. We did have some women who left the company for various reasons. Some wanted to move back to other states or whatever it is, and that actually dropped us a little bit. So it's something that we are focused on, but it is going to take time for us to make that correction.
I'm just wondering, I know CPC has a program sort of where they almost try to teach the opportunity,
Yes.
you know, with the company. And so I don't know if you have anything or contemplating anything like that.
We do. And, you know, I'll give an example. Our public areas department, what we call our PAD department, there are a number of women in that department, which is quite unusual to have in that department, that we're giving them some more management opportunities with the idea that hopefully they can move into a management position.
Great.
Other questions for Juliana or Jackie? Thank you.
I was wondering if we could go back to the revenue page because we kind of went through that one pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Again, just a little opportunity to just take a quick gander. That's okay.
Juliana, I didn't mean to interrupt your cadence, but it's probably helpful rather than going all the way back.
Sure.
Question, Commissioner Hill?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
No questions now? Okay. Then we'll go right ahead then to, if there are no further questions on the employment and supervisor. Juliana, you want to pick it up?
Sure. So moving on to our operating spend. So our total discretionary spend for Q3 was $21,587,000. That's that bold number at the bottom. Of that, 9% was spent on minority business enterprises, 3% with veterans and business enterprises, and then 15% with women's business enterprises. Those are the percentage marks that are shown right there. In here, we have that same number broken down by locality. So as you can see, more than half of our discretionary spend was spent within Massachusetts, and that includes more than $2.5 million in Boston and $1.8 million in Everett.
Oh, can I ask a question about the stats? I know you've got the annual in the first column, and then ideally you'd see, what, 25% in Q3 as a percentage, and the highest is 12%.
The percentages are provided for the local spend, I think just for analysis purposes. The goal is based on that dollar figure.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Commissioner O'Brien, I missed your question. Do you mind just going to?
I was just looking at the annual goals are in the first column for local spend, and then they have percentages, but they're saying they're going off of the dollar amount as opposed to the percentage amount. I guess my question is, if you're trying to reach 20 million in Boston over the year, ideally you'd have a 25% each quarter, right?
The
fluctuation where you guys get like 50% around the holidays or something, and then it drops off. I'm just curious as to why the numbers are where they are in that second Q3 percentage column.
Yeah, Commissioner O'Brien, those annual goals were goals that were put into the surrounding community agreements when those were negotiated. And I think they were really kind of aspirational goals, of course, not knowing at the time exactly what the spend would be. So, we keep track of these things. And I think it's something that Encore tries to do, but it's not always fully in their control on being able to spend money in a certain community.
So these are in the actual agreements, or is this something that can be revisited in terms of should it be reassessed?
Yeah, these are in the surrounding community agreements themselves. So these were negotiated between Encore and the communities, we did not say that these are what the numbers should be.
And but they're also not a venue to renegotiate, right? These are sort of in these documents, static.
Right.
That's right. And I think, our procurement team is focused on this. So they're constantly going out and looking for businesses in these areas. They haven't been able to find some of our needs just don't exist. So, fortunately, Everett's got a big food mart and produce trade. So that's something that we're able to take advantage of. But some of these other communities are more residential and don't have the manufacturers or the services located within those communities.
Got it. Thank you.
Just so that I'm clear on how we come up with these numbers, because the commissioners are asking great questions. The discretionary spend amount is the 21.6 million. And then I see it's about 5.9 for diverse, and then a 55%, which is great, 11.9. I'm assuming that there's overlap in that, correct?
That's correct. So the discretionary spend is essentially, there are things that we know that we can't get in Massachusetts, slot machines, for example. So what we're looking at is the leftover budget that we have and how that is utilized.
Right, and so, 55%, I don't know what the highest has been ever, Jackie. I didn't do that comparison, but that seems very healthy. My point is that with respect to the minority, we're going to have some overlap in the two spends. I'm presuming.
That's correct. So, right. There will be some, is your question, are there some minority-owned businesses within the local communities? Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely, yeah. I hope so. Okay, thank you so much. Any other questions? I think we're all set, Juliana.
Perfect. So moving on to compliance. Here are the numbers for minors on the gaming floor during Q3. We continue to train and retrain all of our relevant teams on the importance of preventing minors on the gaming floor. And I think that's been working. As you can see here, we only had one minor intercepted gaming and one consuming alcohol during Q3. And then the average time of a minor on the gaming floor has been reduced. So, and that's just another thing that shows that the team effort we really have is to preventing and then removing minors on the gaming floor. And then I also just like to note that all of the minors on the gaming floor that were under 18 were small children with parents in a stroller or carried, and they were on the gaming floor for like less than a minute. They were just promptly redirected.
And just on this, I just met with we have a fairly newish head of training and security, and he comes with a great a great background, and he's actually expanded the training quite substantially, added an entire day onto training. And one of the key focus points is identifying, keeping awake, keeping alert, not getting into that repetitive nature, and it's been really effective for the team.
And can someone address the one that was on there for over an hour, what the circumstances were in that case?
Yeah, that person had a fake ID. That's how they got onto the gaming floor. And then I think they were apprehended when they tried to, it might have been a cocktail server or somebody noticed them and asked to receive the ID again.
Did it go through the Veridoc or?
Yes, I think so.
Oh,
I believe, Juliana, wasn't that one, it was a real ID that
Yes.
someone had borrowed?
Oh,
Yeah.
That's with or a fake ID for the most part, I think we're talking really about someone using the valid ID of another person that looks like them, a sibling or whatever. So it's a legitimate ID.
Just not theirs.
It's not theirs.
No.
Any other questions on this? Perfect. I'm going to turn it over to Jackie.
Thank you, Juliana.
So we continue with our TRU patron donation, and as you can see, that continues to be a nice source of income for our nonprofits. Let me get the next one. Very excited. We launched Play My Way in September. And I just wanted to thank both Director Vanderlinden's team as well as Long and his team from GameSense. They were absolutely instrumental in helping us pull this off in a really successful manner. We were very pleased with the rollout. We were a little concerned. It was a big upgrade for us. So our employees have been trained. We've seen a ton of enrollees. We did a match on the gift card with the Gaming Commission, so thank you for that. I think we did that all the way through October. Is that right, Juliana?
Yes. We did.
And yeah, so very successful launch. There's a video, if any of you are interested, there's a video that we used for training purposes, and we had playing back of house for almost the entire month during the launch. We continue to track our volunteer hours. One of the most exciting events that we had in the third quarter was what we call Feed the Funnel, and we packed 83,000 meals in one day. It was so successful and our team members enjoyed it so much that we are bringing it back in a few weeks, and we now have a goal. Instead of 83,000, we want to pack 300,000 meals in 3 days. We have a very friendly challenge with our property in Las Vegas to see who can do the most, and we'll let you know. We also collected donations, which we donated to Beacon Academy, which was established to close the opportunity gap that exists, particularly for students of color. It's a 10-year program, very cool program where students essentially take a year before they start high school, where they go over everything to prepare them for high school. And then it's a 10-year program where they tracked and help through their college decisions and even their career opportunities. We had our first nonprofit leadership retreat. We were very fortunate that we were able to hold it at Camp Harborview, and we actually took our boat and a whole bunch of nonprofit leaders came and joined us, and it was a really informative and productive leadership retreat. This is probably my favorite. We offered a English as a second language course for our team members. It was completely voluntary. We had great participation, and the first group successfully graduated in September. And it was so successful that we're relaunching it and making sure that any one of our team members who wants to go through it will have the opportunity to participate. And Commissioner O'Brien, you'll be pleased with this one. We went and visited the childcare facility. We were fortunate enough, Representative Catherine Clark and Representative Barbara were also there to look at the facility. It's an extraordinary place. The design of the classrooms, you can see in the picture to the left, the green sort of at the top is a tree coming out into the classrooms. Unfortunately, they are having a really, really difficult time hiring aides and teachers. So they're at about 16. They have a much higher capacity, but right now they only have 16 students. So they're full classrooms that are just completely empty. And so Representative Clark was drawing attention to that and trying to help them with their hiring efforts.
And do you have, are you guys doing okay with people that work for you having access to
Absolutely,
the
yes.
childcare services that they need?
Yes, we haven't had anyone express that as an issue or a barrier into work. When we change schedules, it's something that we're very conscious about so that we don't lose. We got to keep our women numbers up, so we're very conscious about those changes.
No, it's nice. I like the lighting. Looks like
It's
got a lot of-
fantastic, and they have the cutest little students. They have a climbing wall for the toddlers, and it was really cute to see how excited they were to have visitors.
That's great.
That is it.
Other questions? Okay. I think we're all set, and Juliana and Jackie on the quarterly report. Nothing else, commissioners? I want to make sure I haven't missed a hand. Oh, Commissioner Skinner.
Good morning, Jackie and Juliana. I just wanted to say to you, kudos on your employee volunteer initiatives. Great participation, and what a way to serve the community. So nice work there. Commissioner O'Brien mentioned the program that PPC has in place relative to promotional opportunities from within. It'd be great to hear from you during a future presentation, anything that you might be able to offer, Encore might be able to offer to kind of augment the existing PAD program I think you talked about, and I don't think you called it a program, but just to kind of recruit some additional women internally and people of color into those management and supervisor positions. And lastly, I want to give a shout out to the Camp Harborview campus. It's a beautiful grounds with fantastic views. My two children participated in those programs over the summer for a number of years. And so just a blast from the past. What a way to kind of reminisce. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner Skinner. And you're right, it is an absolutely beautiful campus and it just serves such a critical purpose. We are also big donors to Camp Harborview. So we were actually fortunate enough to get them to open up and accept some students from Everett. So it's been a really wonderful partnership.
Excellent. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, then I think we're all set on the quarterly report. We're going to move on now to the next item on the agenda. Joe, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. So before you today is a proposal for the development of property on the east side of Broadway, directly across the street from Encore, which as currently proposed would include gaming, namely poker. So I thought I would spend just a few minutes up front here and give a little bit of background on what has transpired before and sort of what process we want to use to review this project. So, in order to move this project forward, the commission needs to do several things. The first thing, which is the subject of this meeting today, is the commission needs to determine whether or not gaming can actually be permitted on the property across the street and under what conditions that might take place. So in answering this question, this doesn't approve or deny the project itself. It simply states that whether or not gaming can be allowed on that property. So if the answer to that first question is yes, we recommend that the commission follow the process that was used for the earlier East of Broadway development proposal, which would include a public hearing to get public input on the project. And then the commission would have a public meeting or meetings as necessary to evaluate and deliberate on the proposed project. Now, if we get to that point and the commission were to eventually approve the project, this presumably would necessitate an amendment to the gaming license and the imposition of certain conditions on the project. And just as an aside, Encore has submitted a notice of project change to MIPA on this project, so, which is fine. I mean, these can certainly work in parallel processes. They're not, one does not particularly rely on the other. Just to make you aware that that is happening, and I think I sent all of you commissioners a link to that notice of project change. But so just going back to the earlier project, so earlier this year, Encore submitted plans for the Easter Broadway development that did not include a gaming component. So ultimately, the commission agreed that the project should not be considered part of the gaming establishment, but it did place several conditions on the development, and a copy of that earlier decision was included in your packet. As currently proposed, the development now includes a poker room and a sports book, and the inclusion of the poker room by necessity would require that the commission regulate this operation as part of the gaming establishment. So now, when that earlier proposal came in front of the commission, one of the issues that we raised at that time was whether or not the citywide referendum that was conducted in 2013 would be sufficient to cover this additional property. Because the commission determined that the proposal, that earlier proposal was not part of the gaming establishment, that question never needed to be answered. But because this new proposal would need to be part of the gaming establishment to operate, this question now does need to be answered. So essentially, again, the purpose of this meeting is to determine if Encore is legally allowed to site gaming, not the development itself, but gaming on the development on that property that is adjacent to the one that was identified in the original referendum. So for today's, what I'm proposing for today's meeting is the following, is that first we'll hear from Encore with essentially a high-level presentation of the project as it currently stands. I think we want to know where things are, but we won't get into really all the nitty-gritty details of the project. That will happen at a later date if we get to that point. Next, we will hear from Todd Grossman with respect to 23K Section 15, which talks about the referendum issue and what are the issues around that. Then after, we will hear from Encore, from Mintz Levin, who prepared a memo that was in your packet on sort of Encore's position on this issue. And we also have some representatives from the city of Everett here, and we've asked them to be here to also discuss that issue of the referendum, but also to let us know what their general level of support is for the project. And then finally, we'll have questions and answers from the commission, but I'm sure there'll be questions and answers throughout as we go. And also, just the one last thing is, I forwarded to you this morning, there was a letter of support from Mayor DiMaria from Everett that was that just came in late yesterday. So I guess if there are no questions from the commission on process and so on, I'll turn it over to Jackie, but any questions from the commission before we do that? Okay, all right, Jackie.
Let me see if I can share my screen.
Okay.
A second.
And if there are documents that you're referencing, if you could indicate the page in the packet, that would be really helpful.
Sure. So this is just a brief overview of the project, just to remind everyone where we are. Let's see if I can.
So this is not in our packet, correct?
No, I don't believe so. So go ahead, Joe.
No, yeah, this presentation is not in the packet. I did include in your packet the design plans that were submitted to us back in July, I believe.
So obviously you can see our property, and at the location of the proposed site is directly across the street from Broadway. The existing conditions, it is currently a surface level parking lot. And this is the proposed expansion. So the proposed expansion would be the portion highlighted in blue. So you can see the pedestrian bridge coming in from Encore, from the existing facility. Moving over, this would be a covered walkway, temperature controlled with moving people movers to get people across the street and to the other side of the street. That's just a rendering of what we're looking at. So what you can see at the very top would be what they call a day club operating on the roof level. This is the proposed use. So we would have food and beverage, as well as sports betting, nightclub, day club, comedy club, a poker room, theater, 979 seats, the pedestrian bridge that we discussed, and then the garage as well. So on the first floor, just to orient you, the bridge would come in on the second floor. So the first floor, you'd have to go downstairs if you came across from Encore, would be the comedy club and the theater on the one side, and then food and beverage, the sports betting on the other side. And then as you can see the bridge coming in on the second level, you would have the poker room to the left as you come off the bridge, or the theater would be below, and then the nightclub would be to the right. And the third floor would just be the day club, which would be open air and utilized according to seasonality. So we're anticipating about 4,000 construction jobs, 800 permanent jobs. We have been in discussions with the city. The city's had a long-term plan for putting in dedicated bus lanes on Broadway. So this project would enable them to do so. Obviously, the pedestrian safety and traffic flow would both be improved as a result of the pedestrian bridge. We continue to be a member of the Lower Mystic Transportation Management Association, which is really working on ways to get people out of cars, incentivize them to use bicycles and public transportation. And then in terms of the conditions, obviously we would make it have the look and feel that you see when you arrive at Encore. Not quite the same design, but from a visual perspective, that landscaping, rather than the surface lots, you'd now have some landscaping there. We will be pursuing LEED Gold certification, which is what we pursued at Encore Boston Harbor, and we're fortunate enough to receive platinum. We will have renewable energy, zero net energy building during operations, high performance building envelope, all electric heating and cooling, electric vehicle charging, LED lighting, stormwater management, and environmental remediation of the existing sites. Just from a permitting perspective, this lays out what we anticipate that we would have to. Obviously, we need to receive permission from the commission in terms of expanding the gaming establishment. As Joe referred to earlier, we have filed our notice of project change, so that's pending and out for public comment as well. There are some local permits that we'd also need from the city of Everett, including site plan approval, roadway improvements, and a specific repair license. So that's just the overview. Do you have any questions?
Questions for Jackie?
I have a couple of clarifying questions. Last time we talked, one of the big issues that came up from many of us on the commission had to do with public safety concerns regarding the bridge and the entrances of the bridge into the casinos, the garage area. But now from what you just showed us, I also have a couple of other questions. I see that a nightclub would be proposed for this building. Are you proposing moving the current nightclub to the other side of the street, or would there be two nightclubs now?
No, we would propose to move the current nightclub, expand their footprint a little bit, give them some more room. Hopefully that'll enable them to continue to attract prime talent. It's no secret that we've had some issues in terms of the way the nightclub's designed and the exit of people leaving the nightclub. So we're hoping that this new design would be better suited for that purpose.
And I think as a similar question, I think I saw on the proposal that you put forward that you would be able to do sports betting across the street. Does that mean you're moving your sports betting parlor across the street as well, or would you be able to do it in both locations under this proposal?
We would keep the sports bar that we currently have at Uncle Boston Harbor and add additional facilities. One of the things that obviously, since we first proposed to you and now is sports betting was approved. And when we were looking at our sports bar, we have about 300 seats, which we don't think is going to be enough.
So would your proposal be a similar setup to what's across the street now, or in the
Yes.
current building?
Yes.
Okay. And can you speak to the public safety piece of the bridge and
Sure.
the garage that we had brought up before?
So we will have, much like the entrances right now to Uncle Boston Harbor, we will have security guards at each entrance. One of the things about the bridge is you can use the bridge simply to cross Broadway. So you can come up from the sidewalk, cross Broadway, and go down on the sidewalk. For that purpose, that would not be restricted entrance. So we would have to have restricted entry on both ends. As you come off the pedestrian bridge and go into one of the other facilities, you would be asked for identification. And then in terms of the garage, we would have that patrolled by our security team as well.
I think my other questions, Madam Chair, are going to have to do more with the legal piece of this discussion more than the proposal that's before. So thank you.
Yeah, I think the commissioners do, you have a lot of folks who will help us on the legal piece. Do we have any other questions for the plan? Commissioner Hill, I'm surprised you didn't ask about the theater. I presume that the theater seats are all in accordance with our earlier discussions around ILAP, right?
That is correct.
So I have a question for you, Jackie, and maybe I spaced out for a moment and you answered it when you answered Commissioner Hill, but what's the plan for the vacated memoir space?
No set plan yet. We may turn that into additional gaming space, but it really hasn't been established.
Okay, so in terms of the petition, it doesn't want to expand gaming area. That's not incorporated into anything right now.
No, it's not.
Does the bridge impact the bridge design? I can't really make sense of the design. Does it impact memoir space more directly than earlier?
It does. So we moved the bridge slightly, and it makes the pathway a little bit shorter as well. But instead of coming in that space between on deck and memoir, it would now come in where memoir is. That would allow both our employees to use it as well as guests. Because one of the concerns we had was our employees enter through back of house. So we need to make sure that they had that access as well.
So a lot of that space will be eliminated in any case, correct, Jackie?
That's right.
Commissioner O'Brien, does that help answer your question too? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? So there's right now, we saw the Gaming Commission, MIPA, and what was the third regulatory?
SWRA.
MWRA.
And then this.
And then the city of Everett.
Okay, if there's no further questions, go ahead, Brad. Sorry.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just as a follow-up to the ILEV question that you did bring up, now that it has been brought up again. Can someone explain, because I think there's 3 of us on the commission now that are relatively new in regards to the ILEV agreements. With a new theater put into place under this proposal, does that now open up a new discussion with the folks that you have an agreement with the ILEV? How does that work at this point?
So that it would not open that discussion because the theater is under the 1,000 seat. So the discussion opens when it's between 1,000 and 3,500 seats. But we have been in discussions with the various theater groups in the area.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about that at this point or no?
Sure, I won't put words into their mouth, but I think they're comfortable with our proposal as is.
So further discussion needs to take place, I think, Madam Chair, on that issue. But we'll get to that.
I
Yeah,
guess I would just follow up on the earlier plan, if I recall, allowed for flexibility in that it could almost be, as I imagine, I might be wrong, a convention type space. Are these going to be set theater seats now?
These will be set theater seats. So
No more
expansion.
exhibit, no more exhibit hall where we wondered about the crowd control on that. Okay, so it would be a limited number without the possibility of dining around it where seats could be added in or anything like that. So it would be, how many seats do you expect?
979, and the remaining areas are what we were proposing for sort of that flex area is now taken up by the gaming areas.
That's right. I saw that. Okay, great.
Jackie, can I ask, is it still going to have that same restriction that we put on, which is you can't get in the gaming area to look down or?
Yes, you wouldn't be able to. It's a theater, standalone theater.
Locked off.
Yeah.
Okay.
and Commissioner Hill, I just to the point of the ILEV and the other theaters and so around there. Once we get past this first piece, we intend to have a public hearing where all of those folks will be invited, the surrounding communities, the host community, and all of those folks who were expressed interest in this before will be invited to that meeting to provide public input.
Joe, I'm glad you mentioned the surrounding communities because I had a question similar to Commissioner Hill's in that would there be an opportunity for the surrounding communities to weigh in on this proposal and potentially reopen the mitigation agreements for further negotiation? I wasn't sure if I should ask that now or just a little bit later in the presentation when we get to the legal portion of it. So thanks for mentioning.
Yeah, and I think all of those things are topics for discussion. I don't think they're topics for discussion today. I think we have to get sort of through this legal hurdle first, and then we'll have to establish all of those, there are many things that we need to talk about, diversity on the construction and, all of these, and again, there's, whether, I think Jackie said they're going to do LEED certification, but, it goes back to all of our original requirements for the main facility that we would have to look at for this as well.
So to that point, Joe, we've gotten through on our agenda, subsection C, little I and little 1 and little 2, right?
Yep.
And so are there further questions for Jackie?
I do have one.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Is there anything in what we've submitted or what you were showing us earlier that shows what the boundaries are of what back in 2013 was known as the Monsanto chemical site?
So
Like a survey, a map or something that would overlay what you've shown us.
Yeah,
That-
the land that we were talking about was not part of the Monsanto chemical site. However, the gateway parcel across from us where the Costco and Target is and everything, that actually was part of the Monsanto site.
And is there any way, I obviously you're not gonna be able to do it today, but is there any way that you could provide that to us in terms of showing an overlay of that site and how it fits into kind of what's here and what's proposed?
Absolutely.
Any further questions for Jackie on her presentation? Because I think what I'm understanding is we have a threshold issue that we've got to get to, and that starts with the legal presentation with our own counsel, right?
Yes, I think this would be a good time to turn it over to Todd and to understand his evaluation of 23K and what all of that means.
Thanks.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Joe, Madam Chair, Commissioners, and all who are joining us here today. So as has been already discussed, the specific issue before you for consideration is whether the commission has the legal authority to allow gaming at the prospective development across the street. Not specifically, of course, whether the facility can be built at all. That was already reviewed, and the commission, of course, said that it essentially could be because it was not going to be considered part of the gaming establishment. It's just because the plan has changed to include gaming that this threshold question has arisen. To answer that question, we have to look at a number of sources. The first, of course, is Chapter 23K, and there are a few provisions that we'll have to take a look at, and we'll walk through those momentarily. Relatedly, it'll be important to look at the host community agreement as well. It was executed between what is now the licensee, WinMass LLC, and the City of Everett. I also just wanted to note that attorney Mina Macarius from the firm Anderson & Krieger has joined us, and he has will be able to answer some questions about some of these principles that we'll be discussing as well. So I'll start by reviewing the governing law. And at the outset, it's important to recognize that unfortunately, the law is silent when it comes to expansion of gaming operations beyond the footprint of the existing gaming establishment. You'll recall, of course, that the commission has established a 4-part test to determine whether certain non-gaming areas are to be considered part of the gaming establishment. But that test will not wholly answer this immediate question. And similarly, it's important to clarify that the commission is not being asked, as we've discussed, whether it will actually approve gaming at the property across the street today, but solely whether it can issue such approval if it were so inclined. So with that, we can jump right in. And I would note that the two documents that I'll be talking about are on pages 99 and 100 of the commissioner's packet. The page numbers are a little difficult to read in the packet, the version I have anyway, but page 99 is a question of the ballot question, and I'll come back to that momentarily. And page 100 is just an excerpt from Chapter 23K, Section 15. This is paragraph 13 in particular, and that's where I'd like to start. This is the section of law, Section 15, paragraph 13, that you may recall required a favorable vote in the host community on a ballot question in order for an applicant to be eligible to receive a gaming license in the first place. In the case of Wynn, such a vote was conducted on June 22nd, 2013, and the results were, of course, favorable. The question is, what precisely did the electorate approve of that day? The answer to the broader question before you may turn on how you answer this narrower question under the law. And there are a few pieces of subsection 13 that we should take a careful look at. And so I'm not sure if it'd be helpful if I share the screen so I can point this out, or if everyone is just looking at the statute, but given its length, if there's no objection, I'll just put it up so you can see where I'm referencing specifically. There are 3 parts that I'd like to look at. So here we go. This is page 100 of the commission's packet. The first thing, and this is not in here, is that the introductory language in section 15 says, no applicant shall be eligible to receive a gaming license unless the applicant meets the following criteria, and clearly states as part of an application that the applicant shall, and then it goes into a series of requirements. And the one we're looking at is number 13.
Todd, it's really small so that if anybody is relying on it, you can't really read it.
Sure, let me make
public.
So this is, yeah, absolutely. So this is subsection 13. And it says that essentially the applicant shall have received a certified and binding vote on a ballot question at an election in the host community in favor of such a license. Now, of course, I added the highlights there just to direct your eyes to that part. So again, recalling that the question is, what did the electorate vote on? There are a couple of things to look at. The first is that the statute on its face says that the applicant had to have received a certified and binding vote on the ballot question in favor of such a license. The interceding area here gets into some of the process involved, but I'd like to just move down here, if I may. Then it says, provided further that at such election, the questions submitted to the voters shall be worded as follows. And it actually sets out right in the law what the question had to say. And you'll note here that it referred to a specific description of the site. And that's where we get into, oops, going the wrong way, here we go. So this is the ballot question. It was based on the statute, and you can see that the question here was, shall the city of Everett permit the operation of a gaming establishment licensed by the Massachusetts Gaming Commission to be located at property located on Horizon Way off Lower Broadway in Everett, formerly known as the Monsanto chemical site. And then there are a series of additional pieces of information that are required in the statute, and we can have a look at those as well. But I would like to just kind of get back to the statute here. So the important piece that we just wanted to flag for everyone is that the ballot question itself references the specific parcel that Commissioner O'Brien was just asking about. And that was the precise question before the electorate on that day. The law also goes on to say, though, right after it, as you can see, provided further that if a majority of the votes cast in a host community in answer to the ballot question is in the affirmative, the host community shall be taken to have voted in favor of the applicant's license. So, in effect, in an effort to distill this part of the issue, then, the analysis turns on whether you interpret this subsection 13 to mean that the voters approved of Wynn's license generally, or you view the inclusion of the specific parcel on the ballot as an indication that the favorable vote approved that specific parcel, meaning the former Monsanto chemical site on Horizon Way. Let me take this down. Okay. And I think there's general agreement that the location across the street is not part of the former Monsanto chemical site. So there are those two competing, if you will, provisions, or three competing provisions of Section 13. Once the commission answers that question, the answer to whether gaming can be allowed across the street will flow relatively naturally. That being said, in order to answer that question, it may also be helpful to consider some of the language in the host community agreement. Clearly, the host community agreement was a part of the calculus, and it's liberally referenced throughout Section 13. And we can talk a little bit about that, but if you take a look at Section 13, you'll see that the execution of the host community agreement was a trigger for certain activity under this particular ballot question, that the host community agreement had to be summarized, and that information had to be included on the ballot itself as it was. Overall, certainly the host community agreement was an important part of this whole process. So,
can I ask you to the other part that says that the agreement itself is supposed to be posted on the municipal website within 7 days and up through certification? I'm assuming that was done, but can you just clarify that for the record?
Yes, I don't have the materials right in front of me, but I'm nearly 100% confident that that was checked and looked at
the time,
perhaps even by myself at the time. So yeah, I don't think that's an issue. I believe.
No, I just wanted that on the record.
Oh, absolutely. I believe Section 13 was completely satisfied at the time. That was something that was looked at very carefully. So I don't believe there are any procedural issues with compliance with this section. But the question now before us, of course, is what does it actually mean? And so that's kind of the issue. The thought was, and I don't want to put Mr. Starr on the spot here, but I know that he presented some information to the commission about the licensee's views of the host community agreement. And I know we didn't have a chance to introduce Mr. Starr, but Attorney Tony Starr from the law firm Mintz Levin represents WIN. I'll let him introduce himself, of course, but with the commission's indulgence, I'd ask him perhaps to talk a little bit about his interpretation of the host community agreement and walk the commission through that. And then we can certainly follow up, answer any questions and clarify any points if that sounds okay.
Good morning, Mr. Starr.
Good morning. Thanks, Todd, for that lovely on-the-spot setup. I appreciate it. Good morning, commissioners and commission staff. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning about my client WIN MA LLC's request to revise its gaming established boundary to include a gaming area in the east of Broadway development in Everett. And thank you to the MGC staff for including the Mintz letter of September 13th to Chief Delaney in today's meeting packet. Like Attorney Grossman, I think there's several questions before the commission today to ponder in connection with this request. So I have three that I've tried to break it down. The first question is, does the commission have the authority to revise WIN's gaming establishment boundary? I answer that question in the affirmative. The commission has broad authority under Chapter 23K and the regulations promulgated thereunder. Like Attorney Grossman, I agree that Chapter 23K is silent on the commission's express authority to revise a licensed gaming establishment boundary once that boundary has been established. But we think there's several sections of Chapter 23K that evidence the legislature's intent to give the commission this authority. I would point the commission to 23K Section 1, subsection 10, which provides that the power and authority granted to the commission shall be construed as broadly as necessary for the implementation, administration, and enforcement of 23K. Also, 23K Section 4, subsection 15 states in pertinent part that the power and authority granted to the commission shall be construed as broadly as necessary. Strike that, sorry. I was in 4, section 15. The commission shall have all powers necessary or convenient to carry out and effectuate its purposes, including but not limited to the power to, and again, this is under section 4, subsection 15, condition a license for any cause that the commission deems reasonable. And lastly, of course, in 23K section 21, subsection C, that provides the commission may include any reasonable additional requirements to the license conditions. I think when you read these statutory sections together, it provides the authority with the commission with the discretion to revise a licensee's gaming establishment boundary once that's been set. Of course, in the regulations, in the commission's regulations at 205 CMR 102.06, there is a language in there which provides that matters not specifically provided for in 205 CMR regarding the licensing of a gaming establishment or the operation of a gaming establishment shall be determined by the commission or where applicable by commission staff in a manner consistent with the principles set forth in Chapter 23K, Section 1. And lastly, I would refer the commission to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court's decision in the Revere versus the Massachusetts Gaming Commission case, which noted that the legislature vested a tremendous amount of discretion in the commission. I think in a sense, the commission has really already decided this first question in the affirmative by the action you took in March of 2022, summarized in the memo of 2022. And by that, I mean, when we came before you at that time, the commission considered whether the then proposed project should be considered part of Encore's existing gaming establishment and then subject to the commission's regulatory oversight. And as Attorney Grossman and Chief Delaney mentioned, the commission applied the well-established four-factor test and determined that the first three parts of the test were met, but concluded it did not have a regulatory interest and instead could address certain specific concerns through license conditions rather than modifying the existing gaming establishment boundary. So in effect, I think what the commission determined in last spring was it had authority to modify the existing gaming establishment boundary if it chose to, but it declined to do so under the fourth factor of the analysis, instead deciding to address it through license conditions. And in your memo of May 12th, the commission and staff wrote that the courts have twice examined the four-part analysis as well as the discretion of the commission to make determinations relative to the composition of a gaming establishment. Specifically, it was recently recognized that the application of the analysis in determining the boundary of a proposed gaming establishment in 2014, and I quote, has a certain practical logic and must be afforded extreme deference by the court. That was in the City of Revere versus MGC case at the business litigation session this past February. So we believe it's clear that the statute does authorize the commission to determine the boundary of a gaming establishment and thus revise it as appropriate as facts develop in the commission's discretion. So that's the first question. The second question, which I think Attorney Grossman raised very clearly, was did the June 22, 2013 election in Everett pursuant to 23K section 15, subsection 13, approve the license to win, or did it approve both the license and the host community agreement? And we think that the election approved the license generally and the content of the host community agreement. And here's how we get to that conclusion. And I think that Attorney Grossman mentioned that it's page 99 of your packet that has a copy of the ballot. So if the commissioners had that in front of them, I would direct you to the paragraph immediately below the question that Attorney Grossman read, and I'll read it. The question asks voters to consider approval or denial of the operation of a gaming establishment in the city of Everett under 23K, authorizes the Massachusetts the Gaming Commission to award a limited number of licenses to operate gaming establishments, subject to the commission's approval, as well as other prerequisites. And then importantly, it reads, those prerequisites include approval by the voters at a ballot question election in the municipality where the establishment would be located, as well as a host community agreement between said municipality and the gaming license applicant. And of course, as Attorney Grossman pointed out, the ballot included a fair and concise summary of the provisions in the host community agreement. I understand 86% of the voters approved the ballot measure. My understanding, as Attorney Grossman mentioned was that all requirements of Section 13 were complied with, including making the host community available to the public in various locations, which I understand to have included the Everett Public Library, Everett City Hall, and online. And I'm sure when the attorney for Everett, Mr. Silverstein, speaks today, he can confirm all that. And I think that there's a section of 23K, section 15, subsection 13, which Attorney Grossman didn't highlight, but which I think is also important to this consideration. And I think that would be page 100 of your packet. And it's in the, on the copy that is in your packet. I would draw your attention to the second and third line. And indeed, the very first provided language says, provided, however, that a request for an election shall take place after the signing of an agreement between the host community and the applicant. And we think that that's important language because it makes clear that an applicant may not ask for a vote until the host community agreement has been signed, thus making clear the legislature's intent that the host community agreement was very much part of the vote and in the ballot and the consideration of the public. So we think that second question gets answered in the affirmative. And then, of course, the third question is, does the April 19th, 2013 host community agreement, which we believe was incorporated into the vote, does that host community agreement between the City of Everett and WIN MA LLC contemplate the expansion of the Encore project as outlined in the Mintz letter of September 13th and described in more detail by Jackie in her PowerPoint presentation this morning? And we answer that question again in the affirmative. Yes, the host community agreement between WIN MA and the City of Everett does specifically contemplate that WIN may undertake substantial new construction on property other than the current Encore Boston Harbor site. And here's how we get to that conclusion. If you
Would it be helpful if we turn to the host community agreement itself?
Yes, I'll give you a couple of page references. Can someone help me identify what page in the packet it is?
39. 39 is the beginning of it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize. I should have noted that. I was working with a standalone copy, so I apologize for that.
Yeah.
So if you've got the host community agreement open, I would direct your attention to a couple of provisions which I think are helpful to the consideration that the commission has embarked on today. The very first recital on page 1 of the agreement states when directly or through an affiliate has or will acquire land and options to acquire land in the city in and around the area depicted in Exhibit A. And Exhibit A is the last page of the host community agreement. And it shows, multiple other sites, not just the site where the current EBH is located. So the recital says in and around the area, which I think right away tells the reader that there may be opportunities beyond just what's in Exhibit A. And then with more specificity, if you turn to page 4 of the host community agreement, there's section 1 which deals with the impact fee payment to Everett, and then section 2, which deals with the pilot payment. And both of those have language which anticipates a project change in new construction. And it's the same language repeated in both. If you're looking at the impact fee payment, section 1, and you go down about 14 lines, you'll see there's a sentence that starts on the left-hand side. It's down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, the 15th line down. And I'll read portions of it. The parties recognize that the project may change and the proposed impact fee with annual increases will apply notwithstanding such changes, including any increase to the project site and building area. However, if total square footage of the project building area, not including parking areas, exceeds the 1,750,000 square feet, then the parties shall renegotiate the impact fee in good faith. It goes on to say, the area cap shall apply to new construction on the project site after wind has commenced operations, provided, however, if after wind commences operations, which is where we are now, wind undertakes any substantial new construction on property which is not a part of the project site as of the date wind commences operation, then the parties shall renegotiate the impact fee or negotiate a separate impact fee in good faith based on the actual impacts resulting from such substantial new construction on such new property. And those same 7 or 8 lines appear also at the end of section 2 regarding the pilot payment. The East of Broadway development, which Jackie described this morning, is being developed on, and I quote, property which is not a part of the project site as of the date when commenced operations, and therefore it meets the definition of new property under the host community agreement. Wynn and the city of Everett obviously have choices under the host community agreement to address this new property. They can either renegotiate the pilot or negotiate a separate real estate tax arrangement, and they can renegotiate the impact fee. It's all built in to the host community agreement. So in sum, our position is there's no need to have a new vote or anything like that, because the host community agreement itself, which was brought forward in 2013, specifically incorporated into the ballot vote, speaks directly to where we are today. New construction on new property away from the current site. So I think there's a path for Everett and Wynn to deal with this proposed development under the host community agreement. And from a legal perspective, I believe the host community agreement was embedded and made part of that ballot question, and therefore has been approved, and there would be no need for a new vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Questions before we turn to Mr. Macarius and Mr. Grossman for Mr. Starr? If you want to hold your questions so we hear both, that's okay. Commissioner Skinner, I think you might have gone first. Did you go first, or Commissioner O'Brien?
It doesn't matter. I'll defer to Commissioner O'Brien.
Thank you.
Attorney Starr, can you tell me whether or not the actual text of the host community agreement was available at any of the election sites on the day of the election?
I'm sorry, Commissioner O'Brien, I would not be able to answer that question. I can try and find that out for you, or Attorney Silverstein may be able to address it, or Jackie may know. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Commissioner O'Brien, I do know that as part of the RFA 2, the city did a mailing to every household in the community that included the host community agreement as part of that. So that letter that was sent out that included the host community agreement was copied in in the submission on the RFA 2.
Could you get a copy of that to us?
Yes, I can.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
I just sent that to Mr. Starr yesterday. I will forward it to all of you.
And just a comment, Madam Chair, as one of the four that was here in the spring, I think this is a live issue. I do not think that this is something that was disposed of by our decision in March.
So to Mr. Starr's earlier point that by our actions, we had disposed of this.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying, Commissioner Bryan?
Yes, that I don't agree with that.
I think that's fair because we were presented with a different proposal. Is that fair, Commissioner Bryan?
Yes, yeah,
Proposal was not for gaming.
correct.
Well, and just to put a finer point on that, where the commission found that would not be part of the gaming establishment, we didn't need to address the question as to whether the election included that or not, because it just wasn't part of the gaming operation, so it didn't really matter. But now it does matter, and we have not squarely addressed what we think the effect of that vote was that day. And that is really the question before you now.
So, can I just please return to Commissioner O'Brien? I think that's exhausted your questions. I have one question or a comment from Commissioner Skinner, Mr. Grossman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Attorney Starr, could we go back to Exhibit A of the HCA for a minute? My question is the proposed new site depicted in that plan?
It is not. The proposed, well, the to be very, very specific, the pedestrian bridge would fall on this plan, but the buildings and structures that Jackie showed on the PowerPoint, Commissioner Skinner, are, as you look at the drawing, they would be to the right of the line of the street of Broadway Street. Broadway Street is, I think, the long street. This particular exhibit, I can't tell from my copy whether it has the name of the street on it, but it's my understanding that that's Broadway running top, sort of north to south on the drawing from the bottom to the top. And then the buildings would be to the right of it on the third of the page that is blank. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Skinner?
It does, yes, thank you.
Commissioner Skinner, could I just follow up with your question, because I don't know if it will be helpful to you or not, but I had that same question. And then I went back to that first recital that is on page, I think it's 38 or 39 of our packet. And it says, when directly or through an affiliate has or will acquire land and options to acquire land in the city in it and around the area depicted in Exhibit A. And Exhibit A is described or defined as the project site. So I'm presuming, as we went through, the project site is the original project. And so your point, Mr. Starr, was that it's in and around the area.
It would be my point, that it's obviously quite proximate to the site. It's just across the street. It's just across Broadway from the site. So I think it's a reasonable interpretation of in and around the area to include a parcel that's directly across the street.
So
I don't know if that was, but I had that exact analysis going on in my head. Commissioner Skinner, what is Exhibit A exactly? All right. So
I have a follow-up to that also, and we're going back to that language you just cited, Madam Chair, in the first page of the host community agreement. Attorney Starr, am I correct that they didn't, when the applicant at that moment didn't have fee simple in that land yet, right? Didn't they have a purchase to buy? But they didn't actually own it at that point, or is that, had they already completed the purchase at that point?
In the where the current Encore Boston Harbor is located,
Yes,
it was an option.
it was an option to buy, right?
Yes, Commissioner O'Brien, when MA closed on the property the last week of December of 2014, as you know, the license was initially awarded in September of 2014, and then we had the referendum vote the first week of November of 2014, and then the closing took place on the property. So it was under option at that time in 2013. It was under the original option agreement.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And Commissioner O'Brien, I apologize. I want to, your earlier comment about the live question, I want to make sure that I wasn't, you didn't hear me to say that the ultimate question before you today was determined in the spring. I didn't intend that at all. What I was only talking about at that point was the question about whether or not the commission has the discretion to adjust a gaming establishment boundary, not the particulars of this matter at all. Just my view is that based on the statute and on the analysis you've done on multiple occasions before, including this past spring, you've evidenced, at least in my mind, an understanding that you have that ability if you chose to modify a gaming establishment boundary. That's as far as I was going. I was not at all suggesting that the ultimate question which Chief Delaney and Attorney Grossman have posed today was addressed at all this spring. And if I misspoke, I apologize for that. That was not my intention.
Right. Thank you for the clarification.
very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you. Okay, so at this point, should we turn to Mr. Grossman and Mr. Carius? Right, and then we can go back to Mr. Starr. Thank you.
So just to put a finer point on that, of course, the commission has amended the boundaries of gaming establishments over the years. The distinction, I think, largely here between those instances in here is that those were contiguous or pertinent, if you will, to the actual boundary of the existing gaming establishment. So it didn't raise this question under 1513 as to what the voters had actually voted on at the time. And that's why this instance is a little bit different from those. I don't think there's any question, as Mr. Starr articulated, that the commission does have very broad discretion and does have discretion to expand the boundary of a gaming establishment. The question here is whether you can do it across the street from the existing parcel. And that's kind of the distinction between the issues or the requests we've reviewed in the past and the present request. So those run through, I think, all of the materials that are relevant to the calculus here. And let me just pause for a minute. And Mr. Macarius, is there anything you thought would be helpful to add before we continue on?
I'll be very brief. I think Attorney Grossman has already given you the sort of lay of the land on 1513 and what the issues are there. In our reading of the materials that Mr. Starr and the Encore team provided, I think the issue that remains is whether I do think there are good arguments that the host community agreement contemplated future development and contemplated a potential expansion and provided for opportunities for the city to perhaps negotiate a new pilot, or expand the pilot, et cetera. However, I think an argument could also be made that doesn't fully answer the question of whether voters need to weigh in again. And that really turns more on the language of 1513 than it does on the HCA. In other words, the HCA may set up some of the safeguards and sort of agreements between the city and Encore for what needs to happen before an expansion, but it may not answer all of the questions. Just as I think, and I think as Encore would recognize, just as there may be additional permitting, MEPA compliance, et cetera, that they're going through. That's not just, and that sort of throws us back into the statutory analysis that Todd was talking about. So I would say the commission's focus should really be first and foremost on that statutory analysis, as opposed to necessarily just the agreement.
So I have a question, and I think it was one that we raised earlier. How does Everett City Solicitor feel about this?
So, Madam Chair, we do have several folks here from the representing the city of Everett, if you wanted to hear from them at this point.
Well, certainly seems to be, from my perspective, kind of in their lane. But I'm all ears to hear from my fellow commissioners. Do you want to hear from the city now, or do you have further questions at this juncture for our team? Because we've heard what seems to be a little bit of competing legal analysis.
Madam Chair, I think what would help me answer that is to have a better understanding of where we go from here. So after today, what are the next steps in terms of decision making, in terms of a public hearing, et cetera?
Well, I think the public hearing piece, and I don't want to speak, is if we could just bifurcate the issue around how the city feels and we feel and the stakeholders feel about the actual proposal, and concentrate. What I think we're being asked is to make a determination that's a legal analysis about whether or not the referendum permits it. And I'm thinking it's really interesting that the Massachusetts Gaming Commission made that determination, but I can be convinced that that's for us to decide versus, and I see we have folks from Everett to help. Commissioner Hill, you've been in the city lane, the town lane before, you've been a legislator. What would you like to hear first? And Commissioner Skinner, I didn't mean to put your question off, because I think that's where we are right now. And then if we, depending on that threshold issue, if we were to decide, no, they can't do it, then I think we wouldn't ever entertain this again, unless it became a non-gaming.
Yeah, and I guess my question is more specifically, when would the commission decide that threshold question? Certainly, I mean, because there's not a vote, we acknowledge that it's not happening today, but just looking to get an understanding of what our process is going to be.
Yeah, well, I think, what we would want to do is, after we get all of the input today, I think the commissioners can sort of sift through that and think about it and see if there's any additional information we need or so on. But I think we would want to vote on this threshold question first before we moved ahead with the remainder of the process. Because once that, I mean, look, if the answer is no.
Could I ask what the vote would be that we would be taking? What would the motion be?
The actual question? Yes, I think you would, it would be something along the lines of the fact that, well, first, if I may, I will answer that question, of course, but let me answer the other question you raised.
That's how.
At least in my estimation, there is no question that it is up to the Gaming Commission to interpret what Section 1513 means, not the city or not anyone else. But it's interesting to hear what other people have to say about it.
We have to have received a certified and binding vote on a ballot question. We wouldn't want, and then it proceeds, but wouldn't we want to have, give some deference to the city in interpreting that?
You could. I think a court would look
Yes,
to
and
what
that's all
you
I need to
think.
know. It's
Yeah.
not like we have to do it on our own in isolation. Understand.
I would say the city's input, it would be valuable to a determination that we make as a body. And I did not mean to suggest that we don't want to hear from the representatives from Everett who are on today. I absolutely think we should be hearing from them. I just want to get an understanding of how we move forward after today.
I appreciate that, and I don't think anybody interpreted it as that, but I think your question was a really fair one. And there's this threshold legal question that it's being presented to us, and ultimately, Joe's imagining a vote, and I'm imagining, okay, but how do we make that determination? And I hear Todd saying because it's in the Gaming Commission 23K that it's ours to decide. And I guess I'm saying, okay, so if it's ours to decide, how that decision-making process is also important, Commissioner Skinner. I think you're in agreement with me. How do we make that decision? How do we come up with that determination? Commissioner Maynard?
I agree with both Commissioner Skinner and you, Madam Chair, that any decision, if we do have the authority to make this decision and to interpret our own statutes and so forth, it's very important to me that the directly elected officials from this community, some of which are still in place today as they were in 2013, give me their opinion on how they're viewing this, and that would weigh in and factor into the way that I make any decisions going forward.
Commissioner O'Brien?
So the further explanation or expounding on that, though, is this is not simply an Everett question. We have licensees who are given gaming licenses in a number of municipalities. So to the extent that we want to hear from municipal officials on their interpretation, now maybe the analysis goes into the HCA, the answer to whether that's a yes, you can do it or no, you can't do it is very licensee specific. But to the extent we're seeking input, I would want input from, all the municipalities that could be potentially impacted by that. And then in theory, we have Region C, you can't get everybody, but we do have, 2 other licensees. And if we make a determination specific to our authority that impacts them, I want to make sure they've had the opportunity to give us their feedback as well.
Okay, so that's helpful, Commissioner Hill?
You had asked earlier if I wanted to hear from the Everett officials. And my answer is yes, I actually would like to hear their opinion on this, as that will also help me moving forward. But I appreciate what Commissioner O'Brien just said as well.
Excellent. Okay, so if we have some representation today.
So, Madam Chair, I believe we have the Mayor's Chief of Staff here, as well as the Assistant City Solicitor, as well as Attorney Silverstein, I think, who's outside counsel for the City of Everett.
And my apologies, I will ask that you identify your position and introduce yourselves. It's a little tricky with the virtual platform, so I appreciate that. Ms. Devane?
Good morning, Madam Chair, and through you to the commissioners and the commission staff. I'm Erin Devaney. I serve as Mayor DeMaria's Chief of Staff. And the mayor sends his sincere apologies that he was not able to participate today. As previously has been discussed, he has submitted a letter of support to the commission for this proposed expansion. And that support is based upon the fact that the first development that WIN has done within the city of Everett has accomplished what the mayor had hoped it would accomplish. It cleaned up a heavily polluted chemical site and turned it into a multi-billion-dollar destination for the city that had employment opportunities for Everett residents. Those employment efforts continue as recently as last week when Encore reached out to the mayor to re-engage on new and different ways that we can recruit members of the Everett community to fill vacancies at the casino. That's critically important for the mayor's community because Everett is a community that has many socioeconomically disadvantaged residents, and giving them meaningful employment opportunities that does not require extensive travel is a benefit to our community. With respect to the proposed development, it is consistent with the 2013 Lower Broadway District Master Plan that was undertaken, which was an effort by the city to create a strategic vision for taking very old, outdated industrial sites and transitioning them into 21st century growth opportunities. That strategic planning effort for the city, which Attorney Latanzi, who's our Planning and Economic Development Director for the city, can speak to, included amendments that were done that resulted in a Lower Broadway District Urban Renewal Plan. And that plan did include a vision for using the parcels of land, which Ms. Crumb's presentation showed currently is underutilized. Basically, this proposal has the opportunity to bring in better and higher uses for our community, which will help in turn generate revenue for the citizens of Everett and allow the mayor and our city council to find ways that we can mitigate the impacts of taxes and what it costs to run a city, to find new ways that we can provide support and services to our residents. To answer a point, and just to confirm for the record, the city did send a mailer in June of 2013 to all residents. It included a letter explaining the process and the procedure by the mayor, and it did include a full copy of the host community agreement. So I did want to confirm on behalf of the city that that mailing was undertaken and that information was included. And basically, Attorney Silverstein, who is outside counsel from Blattman, Bobrowski, Haverty, and Silverstein, he advised the city when the HCA was being developed, and he would be able to speak to you on behalf of the mayor and the city's perspective that we do believe that those steps that were taken in 2013 do not require an additional ballot question. He has shared that opinion with the mayor. The mayor appreciates that opinion, and while the mayor respects that the decision and the authority that resides in the commission ultimately, from the city's perspective, we are in support of the proposed project. It is consistent with planning and development efforts, excuse me, that the mayor has undertaken. And Attorney Silverstein can advise on the basis of our legal opinion why we feel the referendum that took place in 2013 would allow for this additional expansion on the opposite side of Broadway. I would be happy to answer any questions that the commission has with respect to the mayor's position on this project.
Mr. Silverstein? And thank you, Ms. Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Chair Judge Stein, members of the commission. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of the city. As Ms. Devaney indicated, I have been special counsel for the city since the earliest days of its consideration of this project, and have advised it and assisted with all matters having to do with the casino project and the election. And I'll say, as a municipal attorney for going on 28 years, election law and matters having to do with elections is an issue that comes up from time to time. And I would lead with the central proposition of election law, which is that anyone interpreting a question having to do with an election should look to make sure that the will of the voters is furthered, and to avoid the potential for voter confusion. And so that's sort of the precept that I will be bringing to bear while I give you my thoughts on this question. So I think it's important to start with the language of the statute itself. And as has been discussed, the statute, Chapter 23K, Section 1315, notes in a number of places that the host community agreement has to have been executed prior to calling for the vote, that a copy of the host community agreement has to be posted on the municipal website. And to answer the question, yes, it was. And in this case, as Ms. Devaney indicated, it was also mailed to every household in the city. In that if there's a negative vote, and there has to be a new host community agreement, and the process starts all over again. So I think implicit in the statute is an acknowledgement that the voters are not voting simply on a project or on the notion, the ambiguous notion that there might be a casino in the city or even in a specific location. They're really looking at what will this project do for the city? And in order to answer that question, they're required to be given the opportunity to review the host community agreement in toto, which they were. And I won't reiterate what's been said, but clearly in the first recital and in sections 1B1 and 1B2 of the host community agreement, there was an explicit acknowledgement that that Wynn might construct a gaming establishment at some point post opening beyond the quote unquote project site. And I want to note that though we are across the street, we're not, as Attorney Grossman indicated, on adjacent property, but we are across the street. We're in the same Lower Broadway urban renewal district. And so I think it's important to look at what the voters understood and what the underlying purpose of the statute, which I don't want to cross into Attorney Grossman's province here, but I would say that the commission certainly has the ability to interpret the statute in a way that would accomplish the underlying purposes of the statute and the underlying purposes of the 86+% of Everett voters who supported this project, which is economic development, redevelopment of this blighted area, as it was required to be determined in order for this entire area, including the new East of Broadway project site, to be included in an urban renewal plan, and to generate revenue, both for the state and for the city. And allowing this project to proceed will accomplish all of those purposes. It will continue to accomplish all of those purposes. So when the voters approved this project by over 86%, they had knowledge of the HCA, they had access to the HCA, and they would have understood that the purpose of this project was to clean up contaminated land, redevelop underutilized land along Lower Broadway, and bring in revenue to the city. And all of those purposes will be accomplished by this project. And I think it's important to note this isn't an entirely new site. I think it would be a different question if we were talking about a site in Everett Square or some other location in the city. I don't think under the objective person standard that a normally reasonable person would think that a voter would vote in favor of a casino project on the west side of Broadway, but not on the east side of Broadway. They wanted this area that's part of the Lower Broadway Master Planning District and the Urban Renewal District to be redeveloped for the vision of that Lower Broadway Master Plan to be accomplished, for more revenue and more jobs to come into the city. And all of that will certainly be accomplished by this project. So those are the reasons that it's my view and the city's view and the mayor's view that no new ballot question would be required here, because any of the voters who voted on this project originally certainly could have understood that the project would expand based on the HCA and would have supported that expansion.
Thank you, Mr. Silverstein. Questions for him or Ms. Devaney?
I have a question for Attorney Silverstein, Madam Chair. You touched on this just now as you were wrapping up, but what is the standard of the facts of this issue in front of us that you think would determine what an objective voter believed to be the outside boundaries of an expansion based on that ballot question?
I guess it sort of falls in that I'll know it when I see it category. But I know what it's not. So, you know, I don't know that I could reduce this to its extreme, but I know it's not land directly across the street and directly connected by a pedestrian bridge. That the pedestrian bridge, by the way, has been contemplated from day one and discussed from day one in the permitting of this project. It's been asked for by city officials from the beginning. And the Lower Broadway Master Plan shows this entire area as sort of an economic and entertainment district. And this is all in furtherance of that. I guess if I had to answer your question definitively, I would say if there were land that were not shown for this type of redevelopment on the Lower Broadway Master Plan, then I would think that would be a much harder argument to make. And I will note that leading up to the vote, there were, I don't know how many, but at least 3 or 4 extremely well attended public information sessions, public forums, many held at the Connolly Center in Everett, in which this project was discussed specifically in the context of the Lower Broadway Master Plan. And so I think using that planning tool and perhaps using, for instance, the standards of the State Zoning Act, Chapter 48, Section 11, that looks at abutters, land abutting or abutting to abutting, or quote directly across the street from a project site, is a standard that you could apply here and specifically allow this project.
So can I ask, and I'm not asking you to disclose any privileged conversations, obviously, but do you have any insight into why, as the ballot question was framed, it did not use the phrasing Lower Broadway Master Plan area and instead said Monsanto chemical site?
Yeah, you know, I think the hope was to use a colloquial reference that everyone in Everett understood. And one of the great benefits of this project was that it was cleaning up this site that was infamous. And so I think it was really focused on that. I don't think at the time the focus was on, you know, defining as broadly as possible the potential future expansion of the project. But that was specifically contemplated in the HCA. And I think that would have been probably more difficult for a lot of people, some of whom may not have attended those information sessions, to understand what the Lower Broadway Master Plan area was.
So are you saying that the Monsanto chemical site term of art at that time in 2013 would have included everything across the street?
No, certainly not. I don't want to
Okay.
mislead the commission in that regard.
Okay.
I think the idea was to use a general reference to a property that everyone in the city knows generally where that is.
Okay.
They might not know the bounds of it, but they know it's along Lower Broadway. And so I think that was sort of the idea, coupled with the fact that everyone had the opportunity, everyone received a copy of the HCA and would see that it references land in and around a specific plan that showed, a lot of that area, and does show not the full lots, but the land across the street as well. The beginning of that land across the street.
Commissioner O'Brien, if I could just add into that, at that time, all of those properties across the street were fully developed.
Yeah.
There was a Freightliner facility there. There was a scrap metal place. I can't remember their name. And
yeah,
there were houses.
I didn't know if there was a colloquialism that in the area, you get in an area and it includes, there's like an overlay. I didn't know if that phraseology that he was talking about overlaid the businesses that were across the street already at the time of the vote in 2013.
Because I just could imagine if they included those properties that were owned by other people and fully developed, that they might have been somewhat surprised that their property was proposed as part of a casino.
Other questions?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Maynard.
Mr. Silverstein, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate this helpful insight. I'm a simple guy and I like to ask simple questions. If you brought up what the voter understood, and you and Commissioner O'Brien just went back and forth. If I brought the average voter who voted either in the majority or the minority to the site in 2013, and I showed them where casino operations were going on right now today, and then turned them around and said, do you expect that piece of property? Would you expect that piece of property? If gaming occurred on there, would that be a part of your vote? Is the answer yes to that?
So I think, Commissioner, that the answer, if you framed it in that way, the answer may or may not be yes. I don't know. But I think if you said to them, do you know where the Monsanto chemical site is? They'd say, yeah, it's down Lower Broadway. It's down the line is the term that was always used. It's down the line. Well, do you know which specific property? No, but I know it's down that general area. I cannot imagine, given that, what a voter voting in favor of this project was getting was redevelopment of underutilized and blighted land, revenue to the city, jobs, and the development of a world-class facility in the city. I have absolutely no reason to believe that the voter cared that it was on one side of Broadway or another.
Okay, that's helpful.
Commissioners, other questions? Mr. Curious and Mr. Brooksman. Oh, so sorry. Commissioner Hill, so sorry.
Just bear with me one moment, Madam Chair. I have many pages of information I've been writing down. Just as you know, I will forget if I don't write something down. Mr. Silverstein, I think I heard you say, and I just want clarification, it was from a question that my colleague, Commissioner O'Brien, asked. When the question on the ballot, which mentioned Monsanto chemical site, I think I heard you say that you did not believe that that included across the street as part of the thinking of the voters. Did I hear you correctly on that?
Yes, I think that's fair.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So to build on that, this is what I'm hearing. And I want to ask Mr. Macarius and Mr. Grossman, how do I reconcile the language in section 15, subsection 13, certainly does reference the question, and it references the land with the description of the site. How do I reconcile that with what looks like an immediate proviso at the top that the vote must be taken after the signing of an agreement between the host community and the applicant, and the leading recital explains that the property anticipates that the development could be, I've got to go back because I want to get the right language because I think it's pertinent to Commissioner Hill's question. We can't forget that recital. What page is the, this is not necessarily that easy, sorry guys. The first section, the first recital that Mr. Starr started with, when directly or through an affiliate has or will acquire land and options, it's been determined that they did have the option to acquire land in the city in and around the area depicted in Exhibit A. How is it that the voters who we know, we have to assume they were informed, W6, BA 1982, that they read what was in front of them and that they had that agreement and they were probably pretty pleased with it because the terms were pretty good, right? To your point, Mr. Starr. How do we not give some weight to that recital, Mr. Macarius? How do we not give some weight? Do we just focus on the description of the land and not give the community agreement any weight at all? I feel like that's what your position is. Mr. Macarius?
Madam Chair, I'm not sure. I just want to be clear. I know I understand your question. I just would just say I'm trying to give you what I think the arguments might be. I'm not necessarily saying my position is one or the other. What I was referring to is the HCA uses so just to get to the specifics of that language, the HCA uses the phrase land in the city in and around the area depicted as Exhibit A, and in parentheses, the project site. It then, when it goes to, I think Commissioner O'Brien, I believe, asked the questions about what is the project site. The in and around, I think, has two plausible readings. One is in and around that area that is the areas that are actually shown on Exhibit A that comprise the project site include the areas, quote, in and around them, or they include other areas that might be adjacent to it. So that is the part that's a bit ambiguous in the HCA itself. That's one.
Why did they include the word options?
Sorry?
Why is the word options included there?
Well, as I believe you heard earlier at the time, even the main casino site that's currently the site of Encore Boston Harbor was under an option agreement. It was not owned by Encore.
Why plural?
I'm not sure why it was plural or not. Again, but it.
I guess I'm wondering, do you think the voters would they anticipate based on, and I don't know what the discussions were. Did they anticipate expansion?
I think they could have anticipated expansion if you're looking at the HCA, but I think this is where the legal question is tough. Essentially, what the voters ultimately voted on is a license described in reference to that site. What's the reason this is ultimately up to the commission to decide is I would view this as what is the scope of the license on which they voted? Is it a license that has some elasticity as to the site, or is it bounded to a very narrow site? And that's a legal question that I think you could see both sides of. How far is that expansion of the license from there?
And can I jump in for a second? I agree with that. And by the way, I don't take issue with anything Mr. Silverstein or Mr. Starr said, for that matter. As Mr. McCary said, we're just trying to lay out all of the arguments. But let me, Madam Chair, if I may, try to answer one of the questions you raised previous, which I think will answer this question too. And I think Commissioner O'Brien kind of tapped into it with really the question is, why did the statute include language that required a description of the site in the ballot question? What does that mean? The statute itself, of course, says in 2 places that the vote is to figure out whether the electorate votes in favor of the applicant's license. And one way you could go about it, as far as what a motion might look like, for example, would be to conclude that Section 15, paragraph 13, stands for the proposition that the voters simply voted in favor of the license. And that in doing so, they implicitly were taking into account the principles in the host community agreement, the proposed location of the site, which is why there was a description of the site, so the voters could have a sense as to where the casino would be located. But ultimately, the vote by the electorate was simply in favor of the license or not. And the particulars, of course, would be left to the commission to determine by way of the license and conditions and the binding agreement between the licensee and the city.
Can I pause on that? That's an important point. Just pause. When the commission issued the license, did it take into consideration the HCA?
Absolutely.
So the license includes the HCA terms.
Yes, by reference.
And a bunch of other conditions.
Absolutely, and the surrounding community agreements for that matter.
I don't see how it can't. I was just going to say, I don't see how it cannot include the HCA, the granting of the license.
Yes, that is a condition, absolutely. So the alternative would be for the commission to conclude that 1513 says, because by virtue of the fact that a specific description of the site is included, that is the sole location upon which a gaming establishment may be cited. That's, of course, a more narrow read of the statute. It does not really take into account all of the discussion about the host community agreement, what that talked about, what certainly the city's desire was. It doesn't necessarily completely get into what the voters may have thought they were voting for, but one could read the ballot question, I think, legitimately to mean that the voter would have thought that they were just voting on a casino located at the former Monsanto chemical site, period. So I think that's why we've raised this issue, is just to attempt to navigate those 2 things. And I think if I had to distill the question, it would be one or the other. Do you think that the voters just voted on whether in favor of the license being awarded, or did they vote on a specific site? And I think you could make the case in either direction, and you might find there's more support to in one corner or another. But I think that's really the question before you.
Commissioner Steer?
I was just I think Todd summed it up very nicely. That's certainly the question that I am struggling with. I mean, we have the HCA negotiated between the city and WIN, MA, and they had a meeting of the minds. They are interpreting their terms in such a way that permits this expansion. So I have less of a question around what those parties intended, but more of a question around what the voters actually approved. So that's what it's going to hinge on for me.
Madam Chair, if I may offer some context, and we certainly appreciate the deference that the commissioners are showing to the community, and that's that's always been part of what the mayor has wanted, which is what is in the best interest of this community. And to the questions that the commissioners have very insightfully raised, what would a resident in 2013 anticipated would be the result of their referendum? The mayor has always presented the initial development of the current Encore site as being a catalyst for further development in the lower Broadway area in its entirety. He saw it as an important linchpin to be able to not only clean up one parcel, but the other parcels that were very similar in characteristics and use at the time in 2013. That has been his strategic vision and how he has presented ideas and opportunities for residents to consider for Lower Broadway, which would be having destinations, the entertainment locations that would provide offerings not only for residents, but for residents of Everett, but residents all across the Commonwealth. It would be increased access to the waterfront. It would give residents opportunities to have businesses and restaurants that they could go to in case they didn't want to leave their home community. So from the perspective of how the mayor has presented his vision since the initial Encore opportunities were presented to him, he has seen it that when you come over the bridge into Everett, the goal and the vision was always to transform those parcels of land with the type of opportunities that this proposal would bring to the community. So I just wanted to offer that to you because while as Attorney Silverstein has indicated, referencing with common vernacular was important to help residents understand more clearly where in the city, because depending upon where in Everett you live, it might be the line, it might be Lower Broadway. It was the most common community term for that area. But in all of the work the mayor has done to share his vision with the community, it has always been about those efforts in 2013 being the beginning to enable this type of future development.
Other questions? Well, in terms of next, oh, yes, Mr. Starr, absolutely join in.
Thank you, Commissioner. I wanted to respond. I thought Commissioner Skinner asked a very good question when she said, what did the voters approve? And Commissioner Skinner, as you contemplate that, I would like to take you back to one of the sentences that I mentioned in the ballot in that first full paragraph. The second line reads, those prerequisites include approval by the voters at a ballot question election in the municipality where the establishment would be located, as well as a host community agreement between said municipality and the gaming license applicant. I think it's a reasonable interpretation of that sentence to say that answers the question you asked. What did they approve? Well, they approved the location for the establishment, and I read the as well as in to mean the conjunctive and the host community agreement, and I think that it's clear, as you also said, the host community agreement certainly reflects a meeting of the minds between the applicant on the one hand and the city represented by its executive branch, that there was this possibility for future development beyond the project site. 2 places specifically says new construction, new property. And indeed, a voter could very well have been quite pleased by reading that and seeing the opportunity and seeing that the executive branch even anticipated that this might occur and provided a financial vehicle to protect the city or allow the city to improve its position in the event of this development. Thank you.
Very helpful. So going back again to that ballot, and it was the official ballot with that language. Those include approval by the voters, that ballot question. Commissioners, we're not planning on taking a vote today. What would you like to do for next steps? Joe, if you wanted to make some suggestions.
Yeah, what I thought maybe we could do is sort of, I guess we don't really have to technically continue this hearing, but to you know, pick a time certain in the future to bring this back to the commission, so you've had some chance to absorb all of this information and think about it, and you know, we can have some more internal discussions and so on. And you know, but I do think ultimately we need a vote of some sort to put this issue to rest before we can really move on with the actual approval of the larger project.
In order to deliver what Joe's looking for, which is ultimately some kind of a vote, would we need further information from anyone else? Do we want further advice? Do we want written opinions? Do we want to hear from anyone else? Or are we kind of in a position right now where we would make a decision? Commissioner O'Brien.
So for me, I would like to see what the actual boundaries of the Monsanto site. I'd like to see that overlaid from what we're talking about. I am curious to know about the other municipalities that could potentially be in this situation, what their perspectives are. I don't necessarily want open season on comments, but it is a conundrum in terms of trying to, whether this is a bright line or whether we are supposed to be interpreting voter intent. That's sort of a separate question for me that's come out of this conversation that wasn't really fully briefed. So I would like to get a little bit of what the case law is if you're in a position of dividing voter intent, because I can foresee part of this analysis that would, if you get past the initial question of does the statute give us the authority, then we may be in an avenue like that. And I have heard a lot of the stuff. I've taken notes. I've, tried to do my best to write down some of that, but I would like to see a little more information on what the case law is about it, trying to interpret voter intent.
Commissioner Skinner?
I think what Commissioner O'Brien said is very well put, very well framed. I would also like to see that follow up, as well as just take some time to fully digest what we've heard here today. Just dig into it a little bit more with the benefit now of hearing from the city directly and the city's outside counsel, as well as our own legal team.
Commissioner Hill?
The information we received today is great, but I always, as I've said many times over the past year, it takes me a little bit of time to digest everything that has been put in front of me. So I just need a little bit more time to digest the information. And I think Commissioner O'Brien has asked for a couple of things that would be helpful to all of us. But I also think that we can do this in pretty quick fashion. Within a few weeks, I think we should be able to come to some consensus and conclusion on this. But certainly need some more information before we move forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Maynard?
I agree with everything everyone else has said. I'm the type of person, when we sit down at a restaurant, I know what I want to eat before I look at the menu. But if there are people with me that need to look at the menu, and I'm sure I'll learn more as we hear more, I'm definitely not going to rush anyone on a decision this monumental.
Ms. Devaney, have there been any, have you been receiving any opposition or any input from, or any support or anything from the town citizens? Residents, are they aware of this issue? Getting any kind of a buzz around this issue? Gaming Commission agenda doesn't necessarily rise to everyone's level of import, but I wondered if this matter has come before you and any of the city's agenda items, anything like that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This particular issue and the decision that the commission needs to make has not been a topic of conversation. The community, however, is aware of the opportunity for this development. That process started last year as part of the, actually in late 2020, it started because of the work that the city needed to do the Lower Broadway urban renewal plan. So those conversations took place in public meetings with our planning board and our city council as well. And those conversations and public meetings spoke about the type of development that we've spoken about. By and large, in looking at this proposal, which WIN has presented their vision. Obviously, their plans are still evolving because they need approvals. There have been community meetings in which their plans for the development of East Broadway have been presented to the community. But I can't tell you that there's been any opposition to the proposal to move gaming operations across the street. It's been focusing on the other details of the project, the hotels, the other amenities, entertainment value that wouldn't be limited to just people who might be visiting the existing gaming location. They could simply choose to be across the street. And as has already been discussed, I don't think you would find a resident of Everett who would object to the proposed pedestrian bridge or anything that could be perceived as alleviating traffic and congestion on Lower Broadway. And so there have been discussions about what we've talked about, which is the plan to add the extension of the bus rapid transit lanes and to be able to help residents in this community who have nothing to do with the recreational and entertainment values on Lower Broadway. They would just like to see the benefit that additional development would bring from their everyday commute and transportation perspective. So, the mayor has not received any opposition or focus from residents on the decision that is before this commission. But there have been plenty of opportunities to this point for the developers to share what their future development would look like and how we would have better uses in place on that parcel than we currently have today.
Thank you, very helpful. Mr. Silverstein, do you want to add anything before we close?
Thank you, Chair. No, the only thing I would add to Ms. Devaney just said is that the project for quite a while. There have been a number of public hearings scheduled and held and continued, and there's been very little public participation other than initially when a larger entertainment venue was proposed, there was opposition voiced not from residents of the city, but from representatives of nearby entertainment venues who the commission also heard from around the same time.
Was there ever a suggestion that the expansion back in 2013 now, that the expansion would not include expansion of gaming?
Well, yes, at the time, the proposal did not include expansion of gaming across the street. You know, I guess from the standpoint of
No,
what?
not now, 2013, back at the.
I'm sorry.
Was it ever, I understand, you know, the environmental impact and the economic impact of revitalizing that area. Was it ever, as we think about, and I'd have to look at the HCA in its entirety because I'm thinking of this question now. With respect to the options, and I say plural, that included in and around Exhibit A, project site, which I think is pretty clear that it includes current EVH plus the street, maybe a little bit over. Was it ever limited to gaming being really restricted to just project site?
That was not ever explicitly discussed, you know, and I think what was discussed a lot was there were some people who generally had views of gaming being welcomed in the city, as opposed to was gaming something the city should welcome as a driver of economic development in this area. There was discussion of redevelopment of the area within the Lower Broadway master plan generally, but there was certainly never a suggestion that I ever heard, and I attended all those meetings, that anyone said, well, I'm fine with people playing poker on the Monsanto site, but I wouldn't want to see it across the street.
Or expanded.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions that we might have? So,
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, one other thing I thought of, and Joe, maybe you have this already. I can't remember. The actual mailing that went out to all the residents with the HCA attached, if anybody could show us that, that would be helpful, I think.
I just emailed that to all of you.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
To answer your question, Commissioner O'Brien, it was attached
Yes.
to that communication.
yeah, and I think that Mr. Silverstein did say that it was. In terms of the concise summary, is that the ballot, the concise, or was there an additional summary that is referenced? I'm sorry, I'm now forgetting where I saw that wording. Maybe it was in section 13, subsection 13.
I know on the ballot question, there had to be a concise summary of the host community agreement, which pretty much just outlined, you know, sort of what the dollar payments were to the community and so on. But that's in there as well. That's in that letter.
Okay, excellent. Mr. McCary, thank you, Joe. Mr. Macarius?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think given the conversation and potentially the requests that may be coming our way after, I just wanted to clarify one issue related to the question you asked me before and make sure I understand Encore's position correctly. We've discussed sort of two terms that were in the HCA. There's a property in and around and that is then captured in the parenthetical as the project site. And then there is property identified as new property. And while I do agree that the HCA contemplates some expansion, I had understood Mr. Starr and Mr. Silverstein as saying that the current property is the new property. I did not understand them as suggesting the project site as defined in the HCA to include the current site. And that's, I just want to make sure about that, that what the term new property is what the city of Everett and Encore believe it captures the property that they would now be using under this proposal.
See, I'm saying as in and around that exhibit. So
Well, I that's kind of what I'm asking,
that's
because
what you're asking? Yeah.
yeah,
okay.
because because candidly, Madam Chair, I do not. The project site is defined with parenthetical around it to include property in and around on which it has options. I was unable to tell you why it was a plural for options, but there's also this term new property, and I had understood that to be the later acquired property that may be for this project. So I just want to get Encore and Wynn's position. I'm not taking, just want to, yeah.
But I'm hearing you say, the reason why I'm kind of comfortable with my broader is because it's a recital, and that land director through an affiliate has or will acquire land and options to acquire land in the city in around the area depicted in Exhibit A, a project site. But you're saying,
if I could just add, sorry, if I could just add in there, I think, at the time that all of this was done, the Monsanto chemical site was not the only property that this was built on. If you recall, there was a mobile station that was acquired. There was a Dunkin' Donuts site that was acquired. There was the old car wash, I think, that was out front. Those are all separate properties from the Monsanto chemical property. And that, I think, may be why the word options is in there. Because I think they were working on options on all of those properties. And not to mention, they had to get by the sliver of land from the MBTA and so on and so forth. So.
And what about the land across the street that we're now talking about?
Well, I'm not sure exactly when the acquisition of that started. I mean, they were actively purchasing that property when I started working for the commission, which was in 2016, but I don't know if I don't know what their intent was back in 2013 for the properties across the street.
And I want to go back to Mr. McCary's, but I thought I heard that they did have that option at the time of the HCA. Did I mishear that?
I don't think for all of them they didn't. I know there was at least one they didn't.
You mean of the multiple sites across the street?
I'm talking about the across the street. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. McCary, I wanted to finish. Did you?
No, I finished my question. The reason I ask it is because I do think there's a distinction, and again, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I just want to understand from Mr. Starr and Mr. Silverstein, because there's two defined terms that we're talking about in the HCA itself. There's the project site and the new property, and the in and around is used from just a contract drafting standpoint to within the definition of the project site. New property is defined later in the agreement. And I just want to, I'm sorry to put both, I respect what they've said very much. I just want to understand if I heard them correctly, that they were referring to this particular proposal as on quote unquote new property as defined in the HCA.
From Wynn's perspective, the answer to your last question is that this is land which we would consider to be in and around the area depicted in Exhibit A. Mina, I read the project site to be the area where the Encore Boston Harbor was located, and then in and around it are the various lots that surround it, and I would include across the street. New property, I think, comes up later, which is when the development goes beyond the project site, and in this case, on property that was in and around the project site. Does that clarify or confuse for your question?
It answers my question, which is just what you think it is. It's not say I agree or disagree, but
okay.
That's what I was asking. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
And Chair, if I could jump in quickly, I know that when we were discussing this, when we were negotiating the host community agreement, talking about the project, Wynn was actively looking at assembling land all throughout this area. They hadn't done so yet. And so you'll see in that recital that we've been talking about, it says has or will acquire. And we didn't know, Wynn didn't know when they would be able to acquire different properties along Lower Broadway. And so from my perspective, and I think from the city's perspective, the project site was going to be whatever could be assembled and developed as part of the initial project. For purposes of the HCA, that could have included the land across the street had that been accomplished prior to filing for the phase 2 application. I don't think people thought that was likely to happen, but I'll give you just an anecdote. There was a conversation I remember very clearly where Mr. Wynn at the time said, well, maybe we can get that tank farm and put a golf course there. Obviously that didn't happen, but now it looks like the tank farm may be up for sale. So I think at the time, I think the answer to Mr. Macarius's question is specific to a point in time. At the time, the project site could have included that if prior to filing the phase 2 application, they had assembled that land. Now we're talking about this as quote unquote new property because that didn't happen. That's my view of it.
Thursday.
Madam Chair, I actually have a follow-up. I just want to make sure I am clear as I can,
Yes.
at this hour of the day, having gone, now a couple hours talking about this. So Attorney Starr, did you say the new property that's referenced in the paragraph that discusses annual community impact fee payment to Everett is outside of the area that is referred to as the project site plan, the project site?
Yes, Commissioner Skinner, because when you're in that section, remember, there's a temporal aspect to it. It says, however, if after Wynn commences operations, Wynn undertakes any substantial new construction on property which is not a part of the project site as of the date Wynn commenced operations. So when Wynn commenced operations in June of 2019, and Jackie can correct me if I'm mistaken on this, the parcel that we're talking about across the street was not part of the project site. So by the time you get to these two sections of the agreement, Commissioner Skinner, I think what the parties to the agreement were trying to do is appreciating that there was a possibility, a good possibility, that at some point in the future, Wynn may look to expand and increase its operations. They use the benchmark of when you open the operations, if there's new construction after that away from the project site, as determined at the time that it operated, which of course to Commissioner, the chair's point, clear as mud, because we're talking about June of 2013 and June of 2019, a mere 6 years apart, but that's what we have.
I get it. I just want to make sure I'm getting it right. And I appreciate Mina's, point of clarification there. So thank you.
And I'm so sorry, Chair, if I could just jump in with one more point, which is that if you look at section 1B1 and 1B2 of the host community agreement, we've been focused on.
Just a sec.
What's that?
Just 1 second. We want to get there.
Of course.
On page
This is page 38, I think, or 40. It's covered over. It's just packet page 48, maybe?
42, actually.
42.
Oh,
yeah.
42. All right. So we've been talking about the reference to new property, but if you look just a line or two up, it says, the area cap shall apply to new construction on the project site. Sorry, I lost my, oh, I'm sorry, no, further up. It says the parties recognize that the project may change and the proposed impact fee with annual increases will apply notwithstanding such changes, including any increase to the project site. So there was, and this is sort of going to my point, there was a recognition at the time that the definition of the project site may change. This is sort of pre-opening. And then post-opening, there may be this new property. So I just thought that would help to clarify things.
Other questions? Well, I want to thank everyone for participating today on behalf of all my fellow commissioners. It's very helpful. We will have to figure out appropriate next steps. I'm hearing Chief Delaney say he'd like it sooner than later. We have all kinds of time on our calendar, so it shouldn't be a problem, Joe. We know this is a priority, and I think we have to really, of course, we do all of our work in public, so this is a challenge. You know, to the public, we are not going to be speaking to each other about this question, and we are going to exercise caution in terms of, you know, always complying with the open meeting law. I think my challenge is really for the agenda, Joe, is to figure out what we do between now and then to get the information that's been requested here.
I think maybe what we could do is, I know we just had an agenda setting meeting, and it did appear that a couple of the upcoming meetings, there may be some space on there.
Yes.
I think I should certainly work with Crystal to try to identify a good spot and work with Jackie to see what works for the Encore folks. But yeah, I mean, obviously we need to get, I think we need to get that plan that shows that Commissioner O'Brien had requested. You know, and so we'll need a little bit of time. I think it's still to digest everything that we've heard today and so on.
I also welcome any kind of legal analysis that could be memorialized and reduced you know, to paper for us. You did so, Attorney Starr. In light of today's discussion, it might be helpful to get, you know, further clarification. I welcome it for us to have it in advance. It is odd that we get our legal advice in public and share it. I didn't write the public records law or the open meeting law, but I've rewritten it a few times in my head. That is how we get our legal advice, but to the extent things are reduced to writing, that's very, very helpful.
And I think, Madam Chair, if you I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read the mayor's letter. I think there is some legal interpretation in there as well on the city's position. I think on you know, the need
Right.
for a referendum or not.
And I did get a chance to read it. I think I come in actually last night, Joe. But
Quick.
yeah, Mr. Silverstein, you've been part of today's discussion. Again, if you wish to augment, we welcome that. You know, again, to help us get clarity. Commissioners, help me out. Is there anything that you can think of that we're going to want the next time we convene? This is our opportunity to ask and to have Joe start lining that up with Todd.
Commissioner Maynard, are you all set?
I'm all set. And I
Commissioner
appreciate the town for coming and explaining some stuff to us.
Commissioner Hill, are you all set? Okay. Commissioner Skinner, anything in particular that you'd like, or do you feel like you're all set? Okay. Commissioner O'Brien, anything that you can think of? All set. All right, then I thank everyone for the very meaningful discussion. Thank you for addressing all of our questions, sometimes quite candid questions and on the spot. We appreciate everyone's attention, and we appreciate Encore Boston Harbor for coming in today and sharing the quarterly report and then this proposal. So thank you, and I guess I just need a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Any questions or concerns about adjourning? All right, Commissioner O'Brien,
Aye.
Commissioner Hill,
Aye.
Commissioner Skinner,
Aye.
Commissioner Maynard.
Aye.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.